While Trump is announcing whom he's going to nominate for his cabinet, some good news for Ukraine, some not so good news or mixed bag. Ukraine itself is under massive pressure in the Kurakhove area, where the Russians try to close another pocket, and in Kursk, where the Russians seemingly have the intention to push the Ukrainians out of Russia until the 20th of January, until Trump's inauguration. But we'll talk about this and about anything else that has happened in the war in Ukraine, at the front lines and behind them in this situation report. The Russians continue their air attacks, and in Kryvyi Rih, a 32-year-old mother and her 3 kids, among them a newborn, were just killed in a recent attack. Russia used 2,000 drones in October. We're talking about big drones like the Shahid, but the Ukrainians say roughly half of them were just decoys without explosives, and smaller and much cheaper, but added aluminum to increase the radar signature to look like normal targets. That's probably the reason why just recently 2 drones were found in Moldova. They are probably don't even have a navigation system. They might just be sent in a certain direction just to foil the Ukrainian air defense, to fix troops and to disturb them, to distract them in these regards. Let's switch over to the developments along the front line in Kursk, and here we have the Russians in Novoivanovka. They have advanced here. Now, recently the fighting was still inside of town. Now they have advanced somewhat to the east of it. On the map, this is here. So the Russians are now roughly to this part here. They have advanced somewhat to the east. The Russians also attacked with significant forces here towards Novaya Sorochina. This is coming north over Pogrebki. Another attack, we just recently had one in the last situation report where the Russians reached down to here and had losses here. This time again they were pushing down. The videos about it is minutes long. They pushed down the road here with significant forces, seemingly dozens of vehicles, and the Ukrainians destroyed a lot of them. To which degree this now indicates Russian control is unclear, but it increasingly seems likely that Pogrebki and maybe Orlovka might already have fallen to the Russians. The pressure here is definitely significant, but so are the Russian losses. Also, the Russians have advanced in the Kurakhove area. Here we have a geolocation of Russians crossing the water here and being attacked with FPV drones. They suffer losses in this area, but as they came from the northeast, it would indicate that this area here is at the very least in the contested area, if not under Russian control already. And we have from the center of Kurakhove, we have a geolocation as well, indicating that the Russians have entered Kurakhove and have probably taken control over the town. The attacks show drone attacks against targets on the ground, including into buildings, indicating that Russian soldiers are occupying the buildings here. So Kurakhove is likely fallen. And again, the deep state map, unfortunately, is not good in this regard, but we can switch to this here. This is Krimi Caprice, pro-Russian. He's showing us that Kurakhove and the area here are likely contested areas or fresh under Russian control. According to the geolocations, that seems to be accurate. Just as a comparison, we also have the Russian attacks up here, and he would also see Pogrebki probably in Russian hands by now. The Suryak map, where I'm not exactly sure on which side he's more favoring, also saying that Kurakhove is likely mostly under Russian control, and we see them up here, the advance, and we see the pressure that is building up, that is being applied towards the Ukrainians in the south, and the pro-Ukrainian Petrenko is just showing this as a contested area, but nothing in the upper area here. And here again, Pogrebki, he considers Pogrebki as at least partially now occupied by the Russians or liberated, because technically it's a Russian town. Then we switch over to the other front lines in Kharkiv. No news, still no news. Now there's fighting, and supposedly in the area of Liptsi there is a little bit intensive. There's more intensive fighting, but I cannot confirm any change in territory. So we switch over to the eastern front. Here we have the Russians advancing in the town of Terny. Again, it's a new geolocation, but it's here. Now we had them here before. We had them here and we had them up here. So technically they've probably advanced 200 meters if we want it this way. We see them, they technically advance inside of Terni. To which degree is a different story. This is a few houses further, but now every situation report, I have them a few houses further. So far Terni is not being taken by the Russians yet, but they clearly advance inside of the town itself. South of the Seversky Donetsk, I have no change. Continued attacks towards Seversk and fighting around Chasiv Yar. The Russians claim that they managed to advance somewhat along the road here towards Stupochki. But I have no visual evidence of this, so no change in the territory here. We do have change in territorial control in Toretsk, though. There the Russians have now advanced again. Here we have the Russians in this area and up here, and this is somewhat significant because first of all, this is at this point here. So they have advanced towards here, and the second one is even further to the north. This is here. These are the high rises, and as you can see, this is so they have reached somewhere up to here, to these buildings. So the Russians are now advancing inside of Toretsk again. We'll switch over to the area of Pokrovsk. Here I can only confirm two changes. The Russians have advanced south of Petrivka. They have advanced roughly 1.5 kilometers over the past 2 days here along the railroad and along the forested areas here along the riverbank. They have advanced towards the northwest and they have reached Yurivka. I'm not sure if it's fully occupied yet, but it's possible. But this is also an additional gain. So basically the Russians gained this and roughly this here over the last 2 days since the last situation report. Further south, the situation is somewhat different in the Kurakhove area. Here we have the Russians now in the center of Ilinka. I have a geolocation of this as well. Now they are in the center of Ilinka, and the Russians and the Ukrainians have blown up the dam. I'm not sure if YouTube is too happy if I show this, but it shows a video of the explosion here where the dam at the Kurakhove reservoir was destroyed. And as you can see, the damage is somewhat limited. They collapsed 2 parts of the roadway on it, and apparently it damaged the dam below it, but not completely. So the Kurakhove reservoir has not emptied. It has just emptied a little bit, which indicates that it was probably intended by the Ukrainians. The reasoning behind it is not completely clear to me, though. Now, of course, downstream, it led to some flooding. According to Ukrainian reports, the water level rose by 1.5 meters. This should weaken, this should make the moisture, the moisture around the riverbank significantly higher and thus make it more difficult to cross the area there, especially on tracked vehicles if the Russians are advancing downwards here. But it's not enough to collapse bridges downstream or anything like this. And why the Ukrainians would already blow this up if they still have troops north of it, I cannot say. To me, it doesn't make too much sense. I guess they are afraid that the Russians might suddenly push down here and cross over, so they rather destroy that here than have the Russians suddenly in Stary Terni or even on the road here. In this regard, it might make sense, but what it means for the Ukrainian soldiers in this area here is obviously less clear. They now only have this road here as a line of communication towards the west, unless, of course, the Ukrainians create some easy-to-destroy temporary bridge over those gaps here. At least theoretically, that should be possible. Even long woods or long logs, for instance, could be used to walk over there. Maybe that we'll see that in the near future, but it was clearly the Ukrainians, according to the video and the pictures we have from the situation here. The Russians also have advanced inside of Kurakhove. I have a geolocation of this as well. They've now advanced significantly further to the west, and the 46th Brigade is reporting that the Russians tried to cross the Vovcha with 3 rubber boats that were steered by rudder, so not even by an engine. And now this is the Vovcha, but I guess it means the reservoir here, and it was in coordination with the ground attack, so I would expect them to having tried to cross over here. This is at least just 400 meters, so theoretically possible, but according to the Ukrainians, they were spotted early, and obviously on rubber boats without an engine, it has probably ended horrible for the Russian soldiers trying to cross over here. But the Russians still gained further ground inside of the city and have advanced further towards the west. Also, the Russians have in the south already reached Dalnie. Here, again, a big mechanized attack suffering significant losses. And the interesting part is there in this combat here, a Leopard 2 of the Ukrainians shot up the Russian armored vehicles, the armored column, and you see turtle tanks fleeing from it. This is what we talked about in the past here when I talked about turtle tanks in the past, that they might offer additional protection, especially against drones. But as soon as the Ukrainians send their own combat tanks, their own MBTs into combat, then obviously the limited visibility and the limited traverse of the turret will be a big detriment for the Russians, and in this case it seemed to have played out exactly like this. Further south, the Russians have advanced in the area of Rivne and of Novodarivka. I do not see additional gains here in this area here, but the Russians have Rivnopol. They have now reached Rivnopol and Novodarivka. According to Russian reports, Rivnopol is taken. There might still be some Ukrainian presence in it, but it seems that the majority of the town is now under Russian control. That was it with the changes along the ground. Let's talk about the overall situation. First, we start with Kursk. Here, the United States are saying the North Koreans have now likely engaged in combat. They are now being committed against the Ukrainians, and there are rumors that the order is to them that they have to retake the whole territory until the 20th of January. This would obviously mean that Putin wants to improve the situation in negotiations, in likely negotiations later, that with the Ukrainians no longer having a presence inside of Russia itself. Further to the east and south, it is somewhat unchanged. We have obviously the continued threat towards Kurakhove. It's currently in the process of being bypassed in the south. This not just threatens Kurakhove if the Russians keep advancing in this direction. Also, the Ukrainians will likely have to withdraw this area here fairly soon, simply for the need to react to that. To the threats right now, and it seems likely that the front line will be shortened somewhat along this, or leveled along this line fairly soon. This seems to be the clear intent of the Russians right now, and obviously according to them, ideally with trapping some Ukrainian soldiers in there, but so far we see the Ukrainians usually withdrawing in time to prevent this. They still have the issues that they can defend the cities, the towns fairly well, but the flanks, which are fairly open, are much more vulnerable, so the Russians start to bypass them fairly regularly, and this is a threat in this area here as well. In Zaporizhzhia, the Ukrainians are continuing what they said in the past. They expect a big offensive in this direction, but basically say we are prepared, our fortifications are ready, they are finished, so they are optimistic that they can hold the Russians back, but the overall attempt of the Russians will likely be to go towards Zaporizhzhia to take the capital of the town here and to gain additional footholds. In all directions, we see the Russians putting up significant offensive effort. All seems to be pointing that Putin wants to gain as much ground as possible until Trump's inauguration. Then there's a fresh survey from Ukraine, and according to it, 58% of the Ukrainians oppose any territorial concessions. So the majority, but a slimmer and slimmer majority than before. 32% are now willing to make compromises. This was 10% at the beginning of the year. So within this year, the number of Ukrainians has tripled that are willing to do a compromise with the Russians, including territorial-wise. Clearly, again, this is a result of the continued offensive. I talked about it in the past, that the Russians don't just do this offensive trying to gain territory. They also do it to put pressure towards the west and towards the Ukrainians, and to make the impression that they are unstoppable, and thus to force them to compromise. And it clearly shows it has an effect inside of Ukraine. When asked specifically, 46% said that they could accept losing the Crimea and Donbass, and only 39% are refusing. So there we are almost at half the population already saying, okay, we could give up on Donbass and on the Crimean Peninsula. Whereas when they weren't asked what exactly it would be in territorial degrees, then 58% are declining. When they and only 32% are in favor. When it's about Crimea and Donbass, now 46 are in favor and 39% are against it. Then we have some news in sabotage. In Moscow, a Mi-24 Hind was destroyed. That's a combat helicopter. The GUR, the Ukrainian military intelligence, says it was burnt down by a saboteur. The FSB said they stopped a GUR pilot attempting to steal the helicopter. So according to the FSB, the GUR somehow brought a pilot there that apparently wanted to climb into the helicopter and fly it away. And according to this, the helicopter then caught fire and was destroyed in this context. The GUR is saying it's not true. Technically, it should be okay. It should be possible. If the Hind is fully fueled up, it has a range sufficient enough to reach Ukraine. So theoretically, this would be possible, even though it seems highly unlikely that the GUR actually sends a pilot, a fully trained pilot, into Russia to steal a helicopter. That seems absurd in the context here. But as said, this is the current claims, at least. Then we have report from the Crimean Peninsula. There, a bomb exploded in a car and killed Captain First Rank with a captain with a first rank in here, Valery Trankovsky in Sevastopol. He was the chief of staff of the 41st Missile Boat Brigade, and according to the Ukrainians, he was responsible for launching missiles towards civilian targets. So this would be another one executed or killed by the Ukrainian intelligence agencies for being accused to have aimed at civilians. We heard about several bomber pilots, for instance, already being killed in the past. Now it seems to be a naval officer. Captain First Rank is equivalent to colonel in the armed forces, just to have some perspective. Colonel is the last rank before the general ranks. In troop generation, we have news as well. In Nizhny Novgorod, they are now giving 3 million ruble in signing bonus. This is the second oblast now raising it to 3 million. And this shows how the boni are in comparison in dollars to the average income. And you can see the numbers here are quite drastic. 20,000 in Tatarstan and 430 is the average income. Just to compare how different it is, how lucrative it is to sign up for the military. And the article itself says that in financial wise, it makes more sense for somebody age 35 to go to war, fight for a year and then be killed. His family gets more money this way than if he keeps working until he's 60. So there's an actual financial incentive that a family decides, okay, you are 37. It's better if you go off and die. You take better care of your family if you go to war and die than if you stay at home, take care of us and keep working. This is the absurdity, and this obviously helps gives the financial incentives to keep fighting. This is deathonomics being called here, that the incentives are to a degree now that the money is pouring to the poorest nations simply for the death sums, as well as the Russian government is paying significant sums to the relatives of somebody having fallen. And the interesting part is there are the numbers now converted into according to the Russian budget, how much they pay, and it was calculated here. If the 30 billion that are being spent here, if they are more or less equal to if they are being calculated against the 68,800 that are promised to families of somebody falling, then this would mean that 436,000 Russian soldiers have died in this war. This seems to be unlikely. The overall losses of the Russians, even the Ukrainians, I think only claim 800,000 now, and that should include all the wounded. So that the Russians have actually suffered over 400,000 killed so far is not impossible, but it feels unlikely, especially in regards if we compare it to the international estimates. But there we have at least a hard number. What could be a possible number? Obviously, this does not include potential corruption of the Russian officials, skimming off that skimming money off the top to reduce the overall sum, or claiming that more have fallen to pocket the money themselves. But here we have a calculated death toll of the Russians of 436,000 according to the Russian budget. In the political sphere, we have some news. Trump is starting to build his cabinet. It's unclear yet, but it seems likely that Marco Rubio is going to be Secretary of State. Unlike the others I'm going to mention now, so far I have not seen Trump announcing it himself. It was just the media, and Trump doesn't seem to have denied this. Marco Rubio is pro-Ukraine. He's already sanctioned by Russia, so he would be a foreign minister who... he's already sanctioned by China. He would be a foreign minister who can not travel to China, according to the Chinese themselves. He is pro-Ukrainian, but from what I've seen, he seems to think that the window of opportunity where the Ukrainians can win the war is over, and he believes that now a negotiated settlement is necessary. This is... I would carefully agree with him that the Ukrainians, that it is likely at this point that the Ukrainians will receive enough weaponry and money to actually turn the tide completely and recapture 100% of their territory. Seems extremely unlikely as of now. But with him being pro-Ukrainian, and clearly so, this is definitely still good news, because however this war ends, it should obviously end as much as possible in Ukraine's favor. And Marco Rubio seems to be the right guy for this. Then the National Security Advisor is going to be Mike Waltz. He's a China hawk. He's pro-Ukraine. He wrote on the 4th of November, so one day before the election, that Russia should be crippled with harsher sanctions and the weapons should be given free go, that Ukraine should be allowed to use weapons at will. This is now the National Security Advisor. He's day and night different to Jake Sullivan. So this should be amazing news for Ukraine. Then this one is announced by Trump. So it seems likely that he's going to be the National Security Advisor. And Trump also announced that Pete Hegseth is going to be the Secretary of Defense. He is not, from what I've seen, generally anti-Ukraine, but from what I've seen, he said that he doesn't want too much pressure on the Russians. He doesn't want to have Putin on his back heels, so he's hesitant in this regard. He said in the past, Ukraine is important, but at home is more important. This seems not the greatest news for Ukraine. At least he doesn't seem to be anti-Ukraine from the get-go, but he's not... from what we hear about him, he's not the person who claims that we should crush the Russians, that we should allow the Ukrainians to crush the Russians or anything like this. So I guess it could have been worse in this regard, but in the end we'll have to see. First of all, then he's not confirmed yet. He has no experience in this regard whatsoever, and there's some criticism in this regard. He doesn't have administrative experience, and he was a major in the reserve, but that doesn't mean that means he has no staff experience. So no training in geopolitics, no experience in organizing staffs, and that could be a problem in the Ministry of Defense in the United States. This could mean that there might be some issues with his confirmations. There were several senators from the GOP that were hesitant, but they didn't outright say we're not going to confirm him. And the GOP will have the majority, so it's still likely that he's going to be the Secretary of Defense, but it's not as sure as it would be probably with Marco Rubio. In other regards, he's a China hawk, he's an Iran hawk, he's pro-Israel. He was critical towards the... how do you want to call it? The nations in NATO that are considered to be living off of the Americans. A quote by him Why should America, the European emergency contact number for the last century, listen to self-righteous and impotent nations asking us to honor outdated and one-sided defense arrangements they no longer live up to? I said it in the past. I think the Trump administration was right, and before him, Obama as well. It's a joke that Europeans don't spend enough on their defense and rely on the Americans, basically forcing the American taxpayer to, as the Americans always say, we would like to have free healthcare as well. The Europeans have their free healthcare, but don't put money in the defense, in their own defense, while they rely on the Americans. This is likely going to change with this nominee and with Trump 47. They will very likely put up significant pressure towards the Ukrainians to raise their defense budgets to, as Trump says, it pay up what they have promised, because all NATO agreed voluntarily to spend 2% of GDP on defense, and now it's becoming more and more nations reaching this goal, but a lot of them still don't do it, and a lot of them have not done in many, many years, despite their agreements. But as said, he is far from being confirmed as of now, even though it seems likely. And we have one more news about international aid. Norway is apparently already reacting to the election of Trump. They now say that they plan to almost triple the aid towards Ukraine, now to roughly $4 billion US dollars. So Norway is starting up additional aid towards Ukraine. And as I said in the past, the best chance for Ukraine to keep receiving US aid is probably by Europe putting more effort in. And if you're not here for the first time, you know that for months, over a year, I said that the Ukraine war is a European war, and the European nations should do more. We'll have to see how the new US president will achieve this, or how it's going to turn out. But as said, if we look at the three most important positions that are likely, as said, I have not seen Trump confirm Marco Rubio yet, so there might still be someone else. Before, we had other candidates for Secretary of Defense as well. But those three, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, and National Security Advisor, would be the most important positions in the cabinet, very likely in regards to Ukraine, in connection with Trump. And there, if it stays with these three names, two of them are probably fairly good news for Ukraine, and the third one should not be considered a catastrophe, but probably not good news in itself. We'll have to see, and we'll obviously try to surveil this and accompany this here on this channel. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think about the current developments? And if you don't want to miss future videos, then I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss them. And this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.